An officer and her dog were about to be honored, but the K9 stopped on the red carpet. The reason left everyone stunned. Before we dive into this story, let me know in the comments where you're watching from. It's always awesome to see how far our stories are reaching. The sun was rising over the golden hills of Greenwood, a small town surrounded by thick forests and the faint outlines of mountains in the distance, where morning mist still clung to the pine branches. Amid this apparent calm, the local police station was starting to stir. But among all the officers, one pair stood out, not because of their uniforms, but because of the undeniable connection they shared. Officer Sarah Mitchell and her loyal K9 partner, Max, a German shepherd with sharp eyes and instincts as keen as a blade. Sarah, with her delicate features and grey-blue eyes, wore her uniform with the pride of someone who had dedicated her life to duty. Her calm face hid emotional scars from years in the field, losses she rarely spoke about. Max, on the other hand, was pure presence. Even in silence, he commanded respect with his steady stance and watchful gaze, as if he could sniff out a lie in the air. Their story began 4 years ago when Sarah, newly transferred to Greenwood after a failed operation in the state capital, met Max at the K9 training center. They said the dog had been returned by 2 previous handlers, too bold, too rebellious, too sensitive. But Sarah saw something in him, a restless spirit, perhaps a reflection of her own. "It's not about taming him, it's about trusting him," she once told the sergeant in charge of the program when she insisted on keeping Max despite the warnings. Since then, they became one of the most effective teams in the force. No drug, explosive, or fugitive could escape Max's senses, and no emotional hurdle was too big for Sarah with Max by her side. That morning, the town was preparing for something rare, a public ceremony to honor the officers who had stopped an attack 3 weeks earlier. Sarah and Max would be at the center of it, surrounded by officials, cameras, and, though no one knew yet, something dark lurking in the shadows of that seemingly glorious day. For now, in the quiet of the early morning, Sarah gently patted Max's head with a small smile. "Ready to face the cameras, buddy?" Max perked up his ears and let out a low bark as if saying, "Always." They didn't know that, in just a few hours, they'd be saving lives again, and unmasking an enemy wearing the same uniform as them. The main hall of Greenwood City Hall was decorated with golden ribbons, simple floral arrangements, and a flag raised at the center. Local officials, reporters, and guests were starting to arrive, all waiting for the moment when Officer Sarah Mitchell and her K9 partner, Max, would receive the Medal of Honor for exceptional service. Sarah wore her ceremonial uniform with quiet grace. Her blonde hair was tied back in a tight bun, and her eyes scanned every detail of the event setup with a calm that was really pure discipline. Beside her, Max walked with measured steps, as if he knew something important was about to happen. He wasn't just a dog, he was a soldier, a guardian. When Mayor Robert Thompson arrived with his entourage, a subtle shift in the room's energy caught Sarah's attention. She noticed but didn't react. It was typical, after all. Powerful people often made a point to stand out at moments like this. Max, however, stopped walking. His body stiffened and his gaze locked onto a table at the back of the room where coffee thermoses had recently been placed. He sniffed the air intensely, growling low. His fur bristled and he went into full alert mode. Sarah instantly noticed the change. She knew Max better than anyone. That wasn't just any bark, it was the sound that signaled danger. "What's wrong, Max?" she whispered, kneeling beside him. The German shepherd didn't take his eyes off the corner. His instincts told him something was off, and Sarah had learned long ago to trust that silence. While everyone else carried on with the preparations, Sarah approached the table. Max followed, growling again, this time louder. One of the coffee thermoses, shiny with a new label, looked odd. It wasn't plugged in like the others. It had no signs of wear, and there was a faint hum, barely audible. Sarah stepped back. Her pulse quickened. In a split second, she grabbed her radio and called the bomb squad. "Unit Max to base. Possible suspicious device in the main hall. Repeat, possible threat. Request immediate evacuation." Chaos erupted instantly. Guests were quietly ushered out, while Sarah and Max stood firm, guarding the area with an almost unnatural calm. The bomb was there, and no one would have noticed, if it hadn't been for Max. The hall was cleared in record time. Emergency sirens wailed in the distance as a specialized bomb squad arrived. Among them was Agent Ethan Carter, a meticulous technician with a sharp face and dark brown hair, known for his almost eerie calm in high-stakes situations. Sarah approached Ethan, while Max held a rigid stance in front of the suspicious coffee thermos, his nose tense and eyes fixed on the object, as if he could see what others couldn't. "It's there." "He sensed it before anyone else," Sarah said, not taking her eyes off her K9 partner. Ethan nodded. He pulled out a small tactical flashlight and a handheld scanner. As he approached the thermos, the faint hum Sarah had noticed was confirmed. He made a quick hand gesture for everyone to back off, and in seconds he pried off the lid with surgical precision. Inside, hidden between two layers of fake insulation, was a metallic cylinder with wires connected to a small receiver. It was a remotely activated bomb carefully designed to look harmless. "This wasn't a spur-of-the-moment threat," Ethan muttered, his brow furrowed. "Whoever did this knew exactly where and when to place it." Sarah didn't respond. Her eyes shifted to Max, who was now watching her with his tail low, as if he knew this was just the beginning. The tension in the air was thick as winter fog. "They cancelled the ceremony?" she asked, already knowing the answer. "Officially, it's been rescheduled," Ethan replied with restrained sarcasm. "Unofficially, and this smells like an inside job." Sarah crossed her arms, trying to hold back a flood of thoughts. Nothing about this felt amateur. That bomb wasn't placed by an outsider. She knew the security protocols. Only someone with access and knowledge could have pulled this off. Max let out a low growl. His instincts were on edge. He paced in short circles, as if searching for something or someone else. Sarah knelt and looked into her partner's eyes. "What are you feeling, boy? Is there still something here?" Max responded with a soft bark and bolted toward a side hallway leading to the backstage area. Sarah followed without hesitation, leaving Ethan with the disarmed bomb and a growing look of unease. Something was still hidden, and Max wouldn't rest until he found it. The back hallway of City Hall was narrow and dim, lit only by flickering emergency lights that buzzed faintly. The walls lined with old wooden panels muffled Sarah's quiet steps as she followed Max, who moved with purpose, sniffing every corner like a hound on the hunt. Max stopped in front of a slightly open metal door that led to a maintenance room. He let out a soft huff, his ears perked like antennas. Sarah, with her gun drawn, pushed the door open carefully, revealing a space filled with tools, electrical boxes, and a faint smell of dust and human sweat. "Anyone in there?" she asked, her voice steady, her finger tense on the trigger. No answer, just the distant creak of a poorly greased pulley. Max moved forward, crouching low. In a corner behind a metal cabinet he found something, a neatly folded police uniform, soaked in a strong artificial men's cologne. Sarah approached, frowning as she saw the badge embroidered on the chest. "Lieutenant Thomas Bradley." "No way," she whispered, a chill running down her spine. Thomas Bradley was one of the longest-serving officers in the department, known for his strictness and spotless record, a reserved, methodical man who had earned everyone's trust. But Max didn't lie. If he smelled something wrong, it was because there was. On the floor next to the cabinet was a small black box with scraps of electrical tape and a broken antenna. Sarah picked it up with gloved hands and examined it quickly. "This is part of a remote detonator," she murmured. Max let out a deeper growl, now staring at a small ventilation grate in the wall. Sarah approached and heard hurried footsteps on the other side, followed by a loud thud. Someone had escaped through the maintenance tunnels. "Max, let's go," she shouted, and the German shepherd took off like a bolt, driven by the fierce instinct that never failed him. The hallways became a maze of tension. Sarah ran after her partner, dodging obstacles, jumping over puddles of stagnant water, her heart pounding in her ears. The sound of her boots echoed like war drums. Finally, in a blind spot in the basement, Max stopped abruptly and began barking loudly in front of a rusted door. Sarah aimed her gun as she approached. From inside, she heard a metallic click, then a brutal silence. She turned the handle. The door was locked, but not for long. "You know you're in there, Bradley. Don't make this harder," she said firmly, glancing at Max. "If it wasn't for him, we'd all be dead today." Max, still on high alert, waited for her next command. And in that moment, Sarah knew this wasn't just an attempted sabotage, it was a personal betrayal, and she wouldn't forgive it. The silence behind the rusted door was almost unbearable. Sarah kept her gun raised, her pulse steady, but her mind in a storm. Max stood beside her, baring his teeth, every muscle taut like a string about to snap. A loud thud broke the calm. Someone was pushing from the inside, desperate, but the lock held. Sarah quickly crouched, pulled a small tool from her tactical belt, and began forcing the lock with swift movements. In less than 30 seconds, the door gave way. The room was dark and cramped. The air was heavy with dampness and dust. Under the beam of her flashlight, Thomas Bradley's figure came into view. His pale face, drenched in sweat, showed a mix of anger and helplessness. At his feet was a black briefcase filled with electronic devices, cut wires, and confidential documents. "Sarah," he said, his voice breaking, as if trying to mask his shock with disappointment. "You shouldn't be here. Max brought me," she replied coldly, aiming at his chest. "And you know exactly why." Bradley tried to step toward the briefcase, but Max lunged forward with a fierce growl, blocking him. The man raised his hands, defeated. "You don't understand. They forced me," he began, his voice shaky. "They threatened my family. I had no choice." Sarah kept her gun steady, but her eyes narrowed. Lies. Every word in Bradley's voice trembled with the hesitation of a guilty man who'd already given up before being caught. "Who's they? The Riverside Cartel? Or someone inside the force?" she asked, not blinking. "I can't say. It's too late," he whispered, almost to himself. In that moment, Bradley stepped back toward the wall, and Sarah saw his hand brush against a poorly hidden switch. A trap. "Max!" she shouted, and the German shepherd leaped with cat-like speed, knocking Bradley to the ground before he could trigger the device. The man hit the floor hard, his head smacking the concrete. Sarah rushed to check if he was armed. On the ground, the traitor groaned in pain while Max stood over him, breathing heavily, never taking his eyes off the fallen man. "This place was rigged with traps," Sarah muttered, noticing electrical marks on the wall. He was planning to destroy all the evidence, even himself if he had to. Sarah knelt beside Max and stroked his head. "Good job, boy. You saved us again." From the hallway, the sound of approaching boots grew louder. Ethan Carter was the first to arrive, followed by other officers. "Everything okay?" he asked, his face grim. "He's the key piece," Sarah said, pointing to Bradley. "But there are still parts of the puzzle missing. This isn't over." Max lowered his ears, still on guard. What they'd uncovered was serious, but Sarah felt deep down that the worst was yet to come. Dawn fell over Greenwood with a heavy, almost suffocating air. City Hall was completely cordoned off. Federal agents were starting to arrive, alerted by the scale of what had been uncovered. Inside, Sarah watched from an interrogation room as Thomas Bradley was wheeled out on a stretcher, still unconscious, guarded by 2 armed officers. Though the betrayal was no longer a suspicion but a fact, the emotional wound cut deeper than she wanted to admit. Max stayed by her side, alert but with a calm demeanor, as if he knew his job, for now, was done. Though something in his eyes suggested the threat wasn't entirely gone. "Sometimes the most familiar faces hide the darkest secrets," Ethan Carter said as he approached with a folder in hand. "We found more than blueprints and detonators in Bradley's hideout." Sarah turned slowly, taking the file. Inside were aerial photos of the police station, access codes, audio recordings, and a list of names. "What's this?" she asked, her voice a cold whisper. "Officers targeted by the cartel, some marked for elimination, others infiltrators." He wasn't the only one, Sarah. Her fingers trembled slightly as she turned to the second page. There, among crossed-out names and coded aliases, was one that froze her soul. Margaret Reynolds, her mentor. The motherly figure in the force. A woman with grey hair and a soft voice who often brought her coffee during late-night shifts. The person who, for years, had shielded her from the system, could be part of the network. "This can't be true," she murmured, lowering the file. She wouldn't do this." Max, hearing the name, stood up instantly. He approached the file on the table, sniffed the paper, and then looked at Sarah with a mix of sadness and tension. His body language said it all. He felt it too. Something was wrong. Ethan continued, his voice restrained. "There's not enough evidence, yet, but the trail leads to a rural property outside Greenwood, an old warehouse registered under her late husband's name. Bradley funneled money there last month." Sarah closed her eyes for a moment. She felt the weight of exhaustion, betrayal, and doubt, but she couldn't stop now. She took a deep breath, strapped on her tactical belt, and patted Max's neck. "Then we're going. We won't let this rot from the inside." Max let out a low bark. His body tensed, ready for the next mission. Because where there's smoke, there's always ashes hiding the truth. The SUV's tires crunched over the gravel on the rural road, cutting through dry trees and tall weeds. The night was thick, moonless, as if the sky refused to witness what was coming. Sarah drove with a blank face, her knuckles white from gripping the wheel. Beside her, Max kept his eyes fixed out the window, ears alert and body ready to react at the slightest movement. The warehouse appeared at the end of the road, an aging metal structure, rusted by time, with a partially collapsed roof and a single light glowing at the side entrance. No vehicles were visible, but Sarah knew that meant nothing. Margaret Reynolds had always been stealthy, too stealthy. She stopped the car a few yards away, turned off the engine, and placed her hand on Max's head. "If anything goes wrong, you've saved my life more times than I can count," she whispered, as if saying goodbye without saying it. The German Shepherd let out a soft whimper, nuzzling his nose against her arm. Then he jumped out of the vehicle with a smooth leap, moving silently across the terrain. Sarah advanced along the left flank, avoiding the main entrance. The structure had a broken rear window that led directly to an inner office. She used her infrared flashlight, and after ensuring there were no sensors or traps, climbed inside. The air in the warehouse was heavy, laced with humidity and a faint smell of chloroform. Shelves with old files, stacked boxes with numerical codes, and even a table with partially disassembled electronic devices filled the space. In the corner, a portable heater clicked softly. Then, a soft, familiar voice echoed from the shadows. "I knew you'd come. You've always been more like me than you realized." Sarah turned slowly. Margaret Reynolds was there, sitting in an iron chair, wearing a grey coat and leather boots. Her face was calm, almost serene, as if she'd been waiting for this moment her whole life. "Why?" Sarah asked, her voice tight, her gun aimed at the woman's chest. "Why betray everything you swore to protect?" Margaret let out a short, joyless laugh. "Betrayal? You call it that because you've never had to choose between your loyalty and your blood. My son Sarah, my only son. They had him. They forced me to leak information to keep him alive. But even then, I never gave them everything. I never put Max on the list." Sarah swallowed hard, her emotions crashing like waves against a cliff. She couldn't hate her, but she couldn't forgive her either. Max appeared in the doorway behind Margaret. He made no sound. He just stood there waiting. "I understand what you did, but I also know there are consequences," Sarah said, her eyes misty. Margaret nodded, resigned. "I came to turn myself in, not to run. My part in this is over." Sarah lowered her gun slowly. A single tear slid down her cheek. Max approached, as if he understood that this time there were no enemies, just the wreckage of what was once trust. "Let's go, Margaret. The law will decide the rest." Margaret stood, her movement slow but resolute. As they walked toward the exit, Max took the lead, guiding the way with the same dignity he'd shown facing every shadow in their story. The sky over Greenwood turned grey as steel. A light rain fell over the rooftops as the City Hall bells rang with solemnity. The ceremony, delayed for days after the conspiracy was uncovered and the culprits arrested, was finally happening. But this time, it wasn't just a celebration. It was an act of redemption, recognition, and farewell. The central square was decorated simply. No extravagance, just a modest platform, a waving flag and neatly aligned chairs. Local officials, state and federal police, and Greenwood citizens gathered in respectful silence. The air carried a weight of gratitude and mourning. Sarah wore her dark blue uniform pristine. Her hair was tied back, her face calm, but her eyes, they carried weeks of memories, revelations, and losses. Beside her, Max walked with steady steps, a temporary medal on his collar, a symbol of his bravery given before the official ceremony as a quiet gesture of honor. As they stepped onto the platform, the crowd stood. There were no immediate cheers, just a collective bow. Mayor Thompson approached, his voice breaking. "On behalf of Greenwood, we honor not only courage, but the unwavering loyalty of those who protected this city from within, when the shadows were already too close to its heart." He handed Sarah a carved crystal plaque. She accepted it with a slight nod, but her eyes immediately turned to Max, who sat vigilant, like a quiet king among soldiers. The mayor then knelt and placed a second medal on the German Shepherd's collar, A soft murmur of emotion rippled through the crowd. Some even let silent tears fall. Max didn't react dramatically. He simply raised his head with dignity, as if he understood the weight of the moment. "Max, you're more than a partner," Sarah said, her voice steady but emotional at the microphone. "You're the reason I'm still standing. This honor belongs to you as much as any hero in uniform." A spontaneous, deep, heartfelt applause broke out. Cheers from a community that now understood that courage sometimes has four legs and eyes that see what humans miss. After the event, as the crowd dispersed under the light rain, Sarah knelt beside Max. "We did it. Together, as always." Max licked her hand gently, then turned his head toward the horizon, where darker clouds were already clearing, because even after the battle there was peace, and in that peace, the silence of those who fulfilled their duty. 3 months passed since the ceremony. Greenwood, still scarred by the scandal, began to heal little by little. Internal investigations led to several suspensions, and a deep restructuring of the police force was put in place. Tell me in the comments, on a scale of 1 to 10, how would you rate this story so far? Your opinion means a lot to me. Thomas Bradley's name was officially erased from the honor roll. In contrast, Sarah Mitchell and Max's names were engraved in bronze at the entrance of the Regional Police Academy. Margaret Reynolds was sentenced to 8 years in prison. Though she didn't leak critical information to the cartel, her role as a facilitator was clear. During the trial, Sarah testified without hatred, only with the weight of disappointment. Margaret accepted her sentence with the same serenity she'd shown that night in the warehouse, as someone who knew her debt could never be fully paid. Ethan Carter was promoted to head of the technical squad and began working closely with Sarah to create a new internal oversight protocol, this time based on mutual trust and independent checks. They had learned the hard way that sometimes the enemy wears the same uniform. Sarah, meanwhile, turned down a transfer to a federal unit. She chose to stay in Greenwood, leading a small team of officers specially trained to detect internal threats. She knew the greatest danger didn't come from the streets, but from the quiet hallways of the institution itself. Max. Oh, Max. The German Shepherd remained an active member of the force, but now had quieter days. He got his own space at the station, a room fitted with a heated mat, tactical toys, and a wall covered in medals, photos, and thank you letters from local kids. During shifts, he still patrolled with Sarah, but in his downtime he became a living symbol of loyalty and bravery. One late afternoon, Sarah sat on the station steps, watching the sunset paint Greenwood's rooftops gold. Max lay beside her, resting his head on her boots. "You know, boy, I don't know how much longer we can keep this up, but if it's up to me, I'll do it with you until the end." Max let out a deep sigh, his eyes half open, as if he understood everything and didn't need to say a word. Because some stories don't end with a gunshot or an arrest. They end like this, with silence, loyalty, and the rare comfort of knowing that despite everything, good prevailed. And as the sun dipped behind the mountains, Greenwood slept, protected by 2 souls who no longer sought glory, only peace. Thank you so much for sticking with this story until the end. If you enjoyed it, please give it a like and subscribe to the channel. It helps us a ton and motivates us to keep bringing new stories every week. And since you're here, take a moment to check out another one of our stories that's popping up on your screen. Big hug and see you next time. Stay well.